Your country's spending billions of dollars on its military. Should you be spending more? Should you be spending less? What are you getting for your money? If a country like Russia attacks you, can your country even defend itself? The decisions made by your government impact you and other people around the world. Are they making the right decisions? And if you could vote on these decisions, how would you vote? If you're new to my content, One Direct Democracy is a movement for upgrading the global democratic system by taking the power away from politicians and putting it in the hands of the people with direct democracy. It'll also eliminate left and right-wing politics. I've created the technology and a plan for how to make it work. If you want more information about it, check the links in the description. For each episode, I'll pick an important issue, outline the problem, suggest solutions, and then you can decide how you'll vote. Today, we'll be talking about military spending. Okay, so if you're just looking for another talking head that isn't interested in actually doing anything, you're in the wrong place. If you want to be part of the solution, let's get into it. The obvious reason to spend a lot of money on your military is to make sure that your country can defend itself. The less obvious reason for spending a lot of money on your military is that simply spending a lot of money can in fact be a deterrence. The large military budget of your country, in and of itself, might be a reason for other countries not to attack you. Okay, so how do countries compare when it comes to military spending? An organization called SIPRI tracks global military spending. According to SIPRI, global military spending reached almost $2 trillion in 2020. The top 10 countries represent approximately 75% of the total amount spent globally. This is how the world's top 10 military spenders compare to each other. The United States is by far the largest military spender, and its $778 billion budget is bigger than the collective $703 billion of every other country on the list combined. In fact, the US represents just under 40% of global military spending on its own. Now, military expenditures as a percentage of GDP can be used to compare military spending relative to the size of a country's economy. When we look at military spending this way, the top 10 looks very different. There's a lot of possible explanations. One of them is their own unique geopolitical circumstances, and another one could be a preference for spending money on other things like education, healthcare, or infrastructure. It's also worth noting that global military spending figures are at a 32-year high, despite the pandemic's effect on the shrinking economic output. Now, the thing is that war is very strategic, so comparing spending alone might be a little stupid. At the risk of stating the obvious, you also have to consider what the money is being spent on. And you also have to adjust all of these numbers to reflect the fact that a dollar spent in China is probably going to buy you a lot more than a dollar spent in the United States. So this brings us to an important concept called purchasing power parity. So as we just discovered, US military spending is greater than the next 11 countries combined. The conventional use of market exchange rates to compare the spending across countries dramatically overstates US spending relative to other countries. Let's take a look at this graph from an article from Vox EU. Shows that the US military budget in 2019 was smaller than that of the next three largest military spenders, China, India, and Russia combined. The article states, the need to adjust for local price differences when making international comparisons of real GDP or standards of living is well recognized, because relative prices differ across countries. A dollar spent on non-traded goods and services can go a lot further in some countries than in others. The article goes on to say, the same applies to military spending. Soldiers in the Chinese People's Liberation Army, or PLA, for example, receive far lower salaries than the equivalent US personnel. You can see the result in this graph. This is US military spending in US dollars. This is military spending for China, India, and Russia combined in US dollars. You can see that it's approximately half of US military spending. But when you measure it in terms of purchasing power parity, you can see that it's more than US military spending. When thinking about military spending and your country's ability to defend itself, you also have to start thinking about allies. If you're a small country and you decide to stay neutral when it comes to international geopolitical issues, you'll need to defend yourself by yourself if you get attacked by a larger country. But if you're a small country, the obvious problem is that you simply won't have the budget to fund a military that can defend your country against the military of another country that has a much larger military budget. So in this case, you have no choice but to become an ally of one or more much larger countries. This has one obvious downside. If your ally goes to war with another country, then you might also have to join that war in order to show support for your ally. If you decide not to join that war, then your ally will obviously respond to you and say, if you're not going to support us, why should we support you? So it's obvious that making yourself an ally of a larger country can be risky, but deciding to remain neutral and do nothing is also risky, albeit for different reasons. So the reality is that you have to spend a lot of money on your military, or you have to support an ally, or maybe you can do a combination of both. This is a judgment call. The only thing that you cannot do is nothing. The best example of allies is NATO. NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was created in 1949 after World War II and includes 30 countries, including the US and Canada. 3 members have nuclear weapons, the US, the UK, and France. The most important part of the NATO treaty is Article 5, and this is what it says. Article 5 of the treaty states that if an armed attack occurs against one of the member states, it shall be considered an attack against all members, and other members shall assist the attacked member with armed forces if necessary. The massive advantage of NATO is that its combined military spending is massive, and it also has the ability to spend in a way that's coordinated. If the alliance is strong and coordinated, it wouldn't make sense for all of the member countries to spend their money on their military in exactly the same way. They'll be able to buy what they need based on their own unique geopolitical risks, make sure that their allies have the military equipment and resources that they don't have, make sure everybody is trained to use the same military equipment so that it can be shared in an emergency. So this is the net result of it all. If you're a politician, don't just tell me how much money you spent. Tell me how much more capability we've acquired as a result of the spending. Tell me why you decided to spend money on this part of the military instead of that part of the military, or why you decided to buy this weapon instead of that weapon. Which countries are a threat and what capability do they have? Which countries are allies and what capability do they have? Give me meaningful information. Don't just tell me how much money everybody is spending. Okay, so how much money does the government of your country spend on your military? Are they just spending money for the sake of hitting a budget target, or is their spending optimized for the best results? And if you could vote on it, what would you do differently? Tell me in the comments. The reality is we've reached a point in time in our evolution where representative democracy no longer serves the will of the people, and the problems that made direct democracy impractical have all been solved. That's why I created One Direct Democracy. It's a movement for upgrading the global democratic system by taking the power away from politicians and putting it in the hands of the people with direct democracy. I've created the technology and a plan for how to make it work. We don't have to convince any politicians or any powerful people to do anything to make this happen. We have the power to do it ourselves. We just have to decide to do it. If you're new to all of this and you have no idea what I'm talking about, check out the other videos on my channel and the links in the description. Direct democracy is the purest form of democracy. Representative democracy is an outdated, blunt instrument.